Shepard asked me to talk about some legal aspects, and I'm a civil attorney. I deal with real estate and construction and those kind of things. So I'm not here to give advice about criminal law or get very deep into the legalities of some of these things. But when I started to look at some of the questions that Shepard had outlined, just looking at issues of home defense or personal defense, I really realized that there's so much of the right to carry, the right to conceal carry, the laws about defending your home are all pretty much on the political side of what rights do you have and where's the pendulum swinging at this point in time. But when you really start to get into it, I mean, Shepard has hit on a lot of the aspects, because the way to look at it is not so much what rights you have, it's what responsibilities and liabilities are involved in some of the decisions you make about how you defend yourself, how you defend your home, how you go about it. And unfortunately, or fortunately, I'll probably leave you here with many more questions than when you started. And as I said, a lot of the folks in the presentations that Shepard sort of pulled together will start to give you some answers, but you'll come away with an appreciation of some of the aspects. And the concealed carry, the right to carry a concealed weapon on your person, is really an exception to a criminal law. It's against the law to carry a concealed weapon unless you have a permit. Now, the legislature may change that, and they may say it's no longer against the law to carry a concealed weapon, but right now it's an exception to a law, and even that exception has limits. You can't carry a concealed weapon into a bar. There's a whole list of places where the exception doesn't apply. You just can't do it. Wyoming, along with probably most of the other states in the country, if you're convicted of a domestic violence violation, you can't own a gun again the rest of your life. So there are other kinds of restrictions that are involved. For example, I have a concealed carry permit. I asked Mark Roundtree, our range safety officer, I said, what's the policy here? Am I allowed to have this on my person when the range is not hot? And his answer was no. They do not want people handling or walking around with firearms if the range is not hot. There are people down range that don't want to know somebody's walking around down here with a gun. So my concealed carry permit doesn't take me beyond that. That's a safety rule, and doesn't trump anything. Now, I can tell you that's unloaded, but anybody who has any understanding of firearms and firearm safety won't take my word for it anyway. But anyway, I did that to illustrate that the mindset really has to shift. It's not what your rights are, it's what your responsibilities and liabilities are. And for example, the criminal liabilities are still there. You can't wave a gun around and assault somebody or threaten somebody with it. That's a crime. You can't create a disturbance with it. That's a deadly weapon. So there's a high standard of care with what you do with that. So those are some of the liabilities that don't change with regard to whether you're allowed to carry it on your person, in your car, have them all over your home, whatever you choose. The liabilities are still there. The civil liabilities are still there. Again, if you assault or threaten somebody with a deadly weapon, they can sue you and take all your money, even though you don't go to jail. there's civil liability, and you can end up in court if you misuse a deadly weapon. If I have an accidental discharge with that and put a round through my neighbor's house, I still have liability to my neighbor. So there's civil liability out there. There's responsibility of safety and care to everybody else we live with. One of the things, and Shepard's talked about a lot of these different training classes and those sorts of things, and right now, in order to obtain a concealed carry permit in Wyoming, you need to take a basic safety training course. That right now is the sort of minimum state-approved standard, if you will, for carrying a concealed weapon. That will provide you with some reasonable handling and some of these principles of safety that you need to be thinking about, and where your weapon's pointed and what your backdrop is and all those kind of things. From a political point of view, there's a real question in my mind if the legislature says everybody can carry concealed, that takes away the training requirement. As a tort lawyer, Frank is going to say, now you're not, you don't get by with just having the minimum standard. Now I want to know that you're really competent and careful and reasonable in handling that deadly weapon. So does it really raise the standard of care that's going to be expected of people now that there is no state-approved minimum requirement? The issues with handling the weapon are the basic safety issues and those sorts of things. There's also a sort of a fundamental competence issue that comes up with the basic training, and that's going to be, you know, recognizing your background, where you are at the time you may need to use the weapon, what's the backdrop. If you can't hit anything within 5 feet, then you better make sure there's nothing, you know, a carload of kids out there that are going to get hit if you miss your target and go wide. So there's some ability to control your weapon and be safe with it. And nothing in what you do relieves you of responsibility for where that bullet goes. So the training, I guess you just need to realize that it's a much broader training than just knowing how to load a gun and unload it, and clean it, and not point it in the wrong direction. And again, some of the things that Shepard's been talking about, starting with a defensive mindset. And you know, you don't drive into a parking lot and drive to the darkest corner of the parking lot. It's a mindset. And a lot of people do it unconsciously, but if you're going to want to defend yourself and your home and your family, then that's additional training. And as we talk, you'll see that it builds into some of the scenarios and situations that Shepard raised in terms of how you respond and what your responsibilities are when you get into a situation where you may need to use your weapon, whatever weapon you choose to have. That issue in terms of defending yourself or your family or your home, I really thought it was more philosophical than legal or anything else at the beginning, because there are some, I can't remember whether it was from Zen Buddhism or where it came from, but in any confrontation between two people, and I'll simplify it with some different examples. The smartest person in the confrontation is responsible for the outcome. Can put it differently. In any confrontation between two people, the most experienced person in those situations is responsible for the outcome. The most competent person may be responsible for the outcome. And in terms of what we're talking about, the big picture, the person with the best judgment is going to be responsible for the outcome. So just because you end up in a situation where you can use deadly force, there's going to be a very high level of judgment applied to that. You can't use deadly force to dispense justice. You can't use deadly force to teach somebody lessons or morality or manners or anything else. You can't use it to become law enforcement. And you can't use it just because you could. So even if you have yourself in a situation where you might legally be able to use deadly force, just because you can doesn't make it right. And if you go into those situations with that mindset, you're just as likely to come out of the situation in trouble as you are safe. So there are a lot of judgment issues that you really need to be thinking about on that. One of the other things in terms of judgment is, as soon as you put yourself in a confrontation where deadly force is involved, you're betting your life on the outcome. You're betting your life that you're more competent, more experienced, more trained than the person you're going up against. And that's something you really need to think about, and it's something that just going downtown and getting the gun and getting your permit doesn't solve. You really need to use judgment and balance those kind of situations. One of the other just sort of judgment things, and starting to get into some scenarios where a shepherd is going to ask people to put yourself in this situation, and can you respond in this way or that way. Anytime with carrying a deadly weapon, you have to understand that law enforcement doesn't know whether you have a permit. Law enforcement doesn't know whether you're the good guy or the bad guy. They are trained to protect themselves first, so you never want to put them in a position of feeling threatened by you. And again, that's just one of those restrictions. Yeah, you have the permit, you have the right, you have it in your car, whatever, but understand, you know, you're putting them in a situation as well, and just be respectful of that. Shepard asked about the castle doctrine and the duty to retreat, and I've read some of the cases. Wyoming doesn't really have very many, but I've read some of the cases, and there is no magic rule I can give you. There's no easy answer. You're going to be talking to, if you use deadly force, you're going to be talking to a prosecuting attorney who's going to ask you some of these same questions I've asked about why'd you do it, what happened, what was your training, what were the circumstances, was there another way out? The person was obviously incapacitated and acting crazy or whatever. Did you have more control of the situation, and were there things you could do? And there is no easy answer. And as a lawyer, Frank and I will both tell you, we can turn those things head over heels. And Shepard has, one of his examples was, what happens if the lady next door is screaming and being assaulted? Okay, you can run over and I can give you an answer for one scenario, and then I can flip it and say, what happens if it's a domestic fight and the woman who's on the ground screaming has a knife, and she gets up and comes at you because you're coming into her home and threatening her husband. There is no easy answer. It's all judgment. And the more you get into training and working with people who can put you in those scenarios and talk to you about how you deal with that, so that you're not guessing in the middle with the adrenaline pumping and everything else. That you've been put in a class, put in a situation where you think about that ahead of time. You develop a sort of a priority of principles that you're going to use in any of those kind of situations to get you through it safely, safe for you, safe for your family, safe for your home, but not in trouble.